So over the years we've seen tons of weird and wonderful tire warming exploits in iRacing, and today I'm going to take a look back at some of the most controversial ones that we saw, one of which isn't actually a tire warming exploit, it's a tire cooling exploit, but we'll get into that. And yeah, we're going to explain why people done them, how they done them, and what they actually did to the tire. So first of all, we're going to start off in the Porsche Cup car. Obviously this is the new P Cup, which doesn't seem to have too many tire exploits in them, and iRacing have done quite a lot over the years to try and reduce the ability to actually do tire exploits. But probably the biggest one that we saw and that we're going to start with would be brake dragging. So how did we actually do it? Well, essentially it was quite a precise sort of technique, but what drivers would do is we would come out of the pits, and this is especially once qualifying scrutiny sort of became a thing, it made us have to get quite a bit more creative with where we're actually going to do them. So down the straights, typically our goal was to keep the pressures as low as possible. So we'd maybe cap it at around 180, 190 kph, depending on how the scrutiny would penalise us. And then we'd come into a low speed corner like this where the game is expecting us to go slowly, and we would cap it at 35 kph, and you would weave left and right like this. You wouldn't want to go full throttle, it was all about finding the perfect amount of throttle and brake input. You would do that, maybe 6-7 weaves left to right, and then pull away again before the scrutiny pinged you for going too slowly. Now the scrutiny system essentially is looking for you to be driving outside of what they deem normal. So if the average or the expected corner speed is quite low, then you could get away with doing it just a little bit longer. Now I don't want to go too much into brake dragging because it's sort of been a thing for a while and everyone's sort of been there and talked about it, but yeah, essentially what the brake dragging was actually doing to the tyre, it wasn't anything to do with generating temperature or anything like that. It was actually more to do with conditioning the tyre. So you were affecting the actual makeup of the tyre. It's a really hard thing to try and explain because it's not anything that you'd be able to see in telemetry. It was more just you could feel it basically straight away, and you'd look in telemetry and your tyre temps would be pretty much the same, if not slightly hotter than before, but you would have just extra grip. And it took us years of exploring and talking with iRacing back and forwards about, you know, what it's actually doing and things like that, and essentially, yeah, it ended up being a tyre conditioning strategy to where the tyre just reacted differently than if you didn't do it. And it got to the point where it was so powerful and so influential that you basically had to do it, otherwise you would start at the back of the grid, so you would end up being 5 to 8 tenths a lap off. So the second one that we're going to look at isn't necessarily a tyre preparation strategy as such. This was more one that was found by mistake. Now I don't want to claim credit for grass dipping, but I feel like at Apex we were the ones that found it, and it was completely by mistake. I don't want to name the teammate who explicitly found it just in case, but essentially what happened is we were doing a test stint at Brands Hatch for a test round, and said teammate had spun off the track, gone through the grass, and just thought, I'm just going to carry on, and then for the rest of the stint was 2 tenths a lap quicker than before the spin, and claimed that they had a crazy amount of grip. So we looked at telemetry and we basically saw that when the tyres touched the grass, the tyre temps would be sort of going up, and as soon as they touched the grass they would just plummet. So of course we went straight back out and tested it, and the tyres were just magically cooler. So fairly quickly, when we turned up to that pest race, obviously we utilised it because it wasn't against the rules, and you know it was fair game as far as the current regulations had said, and it did kick up a bit of a stink amongst other drivers of course, but essentially what it looked like was you'd be coming down the straight, we would dip our left hand side tyres into the grass like this, and then you would brake and take the corner as normal, but your surface temperatures would be significantly lower than before. Obviously what that led to was a bunch of extra grip, more consistency, better tyre life, and things like that. So you wouldn't do it the whole way down the straight either, you would sort of do something like this, through the grass, and then you would just have a nice open entry to the next corner. Now of course this did kind of grow arms and legs. We saw it probably at its peak showed its ugly head at the Spa 24, where, you know, famously the pole position car done 4 out laps of driving through the grass to keep the tyres as cool as possible, and then on that last push lap ended up putting it on pole, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. And for the whole 24-hour race as well, people were doing it. You know, every single lap of the race, down the Kemmel Straight, people were just all over the grass, cooling the tyres. Every single opportunity they had, they were in there. And the funniest thing was, as iRacing were banning people for it, you were getting a 1-week ban, but it wasn't really stopping the problem. So what had happened to me personally was we did a BMW Sim Cup race, like a week, 2 weeks before the Spa 24 at Hockenheim. And obviously the whole grid was doing the grass dipping stuff, so of course we did it as well. Someone had protested the majority of the field, and I got a 1-week suspension for grass dipping. So I knew that at the time I had a pro license on iRacing, and of course we're held to a higher standard, so you've got to be really careful with things like that. So going into the Spa 24, we were in a situation where it could have just been a 2-week ban, but I also could have potentially had my pro license taken off me for, you know, repeatedly using an exploit that I'd already been suspended for. So I was sort of in a tough predicament where I couldn't really do it, but other guys who hadn't raced in Sim Cup and hadn't had a suspension could have done it. So yeah, that was a really rough one. Eventually it did end up getting patched. As I say, everything that I'm going to mention in this video has been fixed, but I just wanted to kind of go back and revisit some of these craziest tyre exploits that we've ever seen and take a little look back at them. Hi there guys, I just want to interrupt this video very quickly to announce that I'm offering one-to-one coaching sessions on iRacing. If you're looking for some help with GT3s, Porsche Cup, building setups, analysing your previous races, or analysing telemetry, then you can click on the link pinned in the comments below to join my Discord server. You can send a coaching request in there and I'll get back to you. With that, let's get back to the video. So the third exploit that we saw, and one that it's probably the most recent one that we've seen, and something that has recently been patched, is the clutch kick. Now this happened after I left Pesk, so this isn't one that I've personally done, but essentially what you would see is there would be drivers that would come into a corner and they would pull the clutch in, hit the brakes, and then drop the clutch to essentially spin up the rear tyres. They would like downshift into like first gear, let go of the clutch, right on the limit of blowing the engine up, and the rear of the car would slide into the corner like left to right. And because of that sort of under rotation, I suppose, you sort of downshift all the way into second and then drop the clutch and the car would just slide into the corner. Now what that did was generated a heck of a lot of rear tyre temp, just because the tyre was under rotating because of the engine speed. And I'll try and find some clips to put into the video to kind of show you exactly what it looked and sounded like. But yeah, that was a really tough one. You had to like sort of drift the car into every single corner right on the limit of blowing the engine up, just to generate rear tyre temperature. Then of course on the straights you could do like a little bit of the weaving that we still see today. But that was one, as I say, that happened after I left. And that's why now you can't engage the clutch at over like 80 or 90 kph. It was to try and prevent things like that as well. So there's a lot of things that have changed drastically in iRacing over the years, and that is just simply because of what esports drivers have found. It's why now when you clip the grass, the tyres, you know, feel a bit weird for a while. I'm not 100% sure if they actually get hotter or if it's more, yeah, the grass is stuck to the tyre or what exactly is going on, but all I know is that brake dragging doesn't do anything, grass dipping doesn't do anything, and of course we can't do this one now because you can't engage the clutch at higher speeds. The other reason as well that we can't engage the clutch at higher speeds as well is for the fuel saving aspect. Of course we saw a lot in the sports level of, you know, when we were coming into a corner, we would obviously do the traditional lift coast. So for example this next right hander downhill, so it'd be a great opportunity to coast. So we would lift off, pull the clutch in, and then get onto the brakes. And that was a great way to save fuel. You could save like an extra 0.05 to 0.1 of a litre per lap depending on what circuit you're at. And the whole reason is because you could pull the clutch in, reduce the engine braking or the engine resistance, and the car would just coast a little bit quicker into the corner than it would normally. And it just allowed you to carry a bit of extra momentum to save the extra fuel. So the last exploit that we're going to cover, that isn't one that I saw a huge amount, I did see it once or twice, was dragging the car up against the pit wall. So I saw this in, I think it was a Carrera Cup GB round, sort of run up against the wall like this, and you could see drivers sort of bumping into the wall and just dragging along it and then pulling off and finding a way to do it to where they wouldn't get damage. Now, from what I can understand, again this happened after I left, but from talking to guys who were involved in the series at the time, essentially what it was doing was putting heat into the sidewall of the tyre, and of course generating extra temp, so as the car as you turned, for example, to the right, and the car squatted on that left-hand side tyre, there was extra temperature there that would give you extra grip, obviously. And it's not something I saw a huge amount of. As I say, I saw it in a couple of rounds of Carrera Cup GB. I think one of them was at Bathurst. Yeah, where we saw drivers sort of leaning up against the pit wall to try and generate sidewall temperature that then in turn gave you extra grip through the corner as the car compressed and squatted onto that side. So yeah, thankfully whenever it wasn't an exploit that could be used in the races. Kind of the same as like the brake dragging and the clutch kicking thing, like this is all sort of quality specific, but the grass dipping thing that we saw, that was even more important in the race than it was in qualifying. So the last exploit that we're going to look at is an old one. This is from maybe the end of 2019, start of 2020, and we're back in the OG 991 Cup car. One of my all-time favourite cars on the sim before the later updates came in. But this one was probably the most controversial one because iRacing started banning people for doing it, but then another member of the iRacing stewards team was then unbanning people, as it was so in the grey area in terms of the rules that they didn't actually know whether to ban people or not. So this is what brake dragging essentially stemmed from. And what guys were doing is they were coming out of the pits and they would select a speed. I can't remember exactly what the speed was. I want to say it was around 65 kph, but they would hold the clutch in like this and then kick the clutch. There's probably a little bit slower than that. They would kick the clutch like this, and then you would hold the brake on like this and burn out the rear tyres and then pull away to generate rear tyre temperature. Now this got so... obviously you're putting so much energy through the rear tyres that it's very easy to overheat them, and it came to the point where people were using the in-sim timer, like the video log timer thing, to time it within half a second of how long to do it, because if you were like a second too short or a second too long, the rear grip was just horrendous. So it was essentially this, and this is what guys were doing, was, I think it was somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds to do a burnout and generate rear tyre temperature. And you know what we ended up seeing was, in the practice sessions before quali, people were obviously pulling over to the side of the track and doing it, and it was just leaving big massive black marks on the side of the track. So you'd be doing this and holding a very specific speed and then staring at the timer on the screen to go, right, okay, 3, 2, 1, and then pull off, brake, and pull away. And of course this was before quality scrutiny and things like that. It just, I think this is what brake dragging sort of stemmed from. This was like the first really big exploit that we saw, was the burnouts, and these were, yeah, absolutely brutal because they were so hard to get right. They were probably the most difficult one to actually execute with one chance in an official quali session. And yeah, it was really bad. It looked horrible on broadcasts, and as I say, with all the confusion about whether it was legal or not from the stewards, you know, people were getting banned like days before a pro qualification round and then having to ask the question if they were going to get unbanned. Some guys got unbanned, some didn't, so some ended up missing pro Q races because of it, even though others got unbanned. So there was just constant appeals flying around across the board from all the different esports drivers at the time coming through the pro qualification series, and of course all of us that were already in PESC were just sitting watching this going, please fix this before the season starts, because none of us wanted to do this. So thankfully I never had to actually do it in an actual race, but this was a huge one that happened, and I'm pretty sure it did eventually get completely banned after 1 or 2 rounds, and then that was the end of it. We never saw any more of it. But yeah, this was a very brief one, but it definitely started the whole tyre exploit sort of side quests that ended up following in the later years. So yeah, glad to see the back of it. I'm glad that iRacing have introduced systems to stop things like this, but of course we're always going to be battling against the tyre model to try and find something to exploit and something to increase performance. So then guys, that is the top 5 iRacing tyre exploits that I've come across in my time on the sim. Of course there's so many things that are going to keep on popping up over the next few years. Of course at the moment we're currently dealing with the excessive scrubbing being on out laps, and that's always going to be a tough one to solve, as it's not something that an in-game system can fix. It's something that's going to have to come with a tyre model update, which is always it always comes with added risks. For iRacing, you know, they're always trying to make small tweaks to the tyre every single season to try and keep things realistic and as you'd expect. But of course, in the sim, there's some things that just can't be simulated properly. I do sympathise with iRacing. It's never easy, but it's something that they've got to try and get on top of as soon as possible, because with PESC obviously being announced coming back this year, everyone's going to be looking at that series hoping that there's it's just a nice clean series. There's no sort of exploits involved that are going to potentially ruin the race results, and it's been year upon year there's been something since 2020 that has just plagued PESC and any sort of esports championship in general, to be honest. But PESC is sort of where they all sort of stem from, and it's where they're discovered, so everyone's kind of hoping that gets fixed, but yeah, time will tell. But with that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.